We often imagine clutter as stacks of clothes, piles of books, or drawers filled with things we haven't touched in years. Yet there exists another kind of clutter, far more suffocating than any crowded room: the hidden clutter within the human mind. These are the burdens no one sees, the endless worries that circle late at night, the harsh self-criticisms that echo in silence, the unspoken expectations we feel from others, and the weight of unresolved memories that sit like boxes of dust in an attic we rarely visit. This hidden clutter drains us more than any physical mess ever could, because it does not just occupy space, it occupies our spirit. Think of the last time you felt inexplicably tired, not because you had run a marathon or worked until your body gave out, but because your mind was racing endlessly. That kind of exhaustion is not physical. It is mental clutter pressing down, layer after invisible layer, until even the simplest joys feel out of reach. Many people live with this burden as if it were normal, carrying worry like a second skin, comparing themselves until they no longer recognize their own reflection, chasing after expectations that were never theirs to begin with. Edgar Cayce often reminded his followers that the mind is not separate from the body. What we carry inside eventually manifests outside. Just as clutter in a room makes it hard to breathe freely, clutter in the mind makes it impossible to live freely. Cayce spoke of how thoughts are things, real and active, and how repeated thoughts could form chains around a soul, binding it to unnecessary suffering. To simplify the spirit, then, is not to erase life's responsibilities, but to cut those chains and allow the soul to move as it was meant to. Light, clear, unburdened. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine walking into a small room. On every shelf sits an object. Some you recognize, some you don't. At first, you think they are harmless, but soon you realize there is no place to sit, no space to stretch, no room to breathe. The clutter owns the room, not you. Now imagine this room is your mind. How much of what is stacked inside belongs to you? How much is inherited from others? Their voices, their demands, their judgments? This is the reality of our modern mental state. The hidden clutter is not just there. It is shaping the quality of our lives. The modern world feeds this inner mess in ways we rarely pause to see. Notifications tug at us like restless children. News cycles scream of crises and division. Social media presents us with endless mirrors of comparison. Who is richer? Who is prettier? Who is happier? Who is more successful? The mind is asked to process more information in a single week than our ancestors did in a year. And yet no one teaches us how to sort it, how to discard, how to keep only what nourishes. We are, in many ways, hoarders of invisible burdens. When Cayce spoke of healing, he often began not with medicine, but with alignment. He believed that healing begins when a person clears what does not belong, whether in the body, the emotions, or the spirit. In that light, spiritual minimalism is not a modern invention, but an ancient necessity. The act of choosing what truly belongs in the house of your soul. Imagine what would happen if you cleaned that inner room, not once, but daily. Each thought examined before it takes root. Each expectation weighed before it is allowed to sit in your chest. Each fear acknowledged, then placed gently at the door instead of hidden under the bed. That is what it means to live mentally uncluttered. Perhaps you have felt it before. The rare moment when you sit quietly with nothing to prove, no one to impress, no deadlines looming, just a simple breath filling your lungs. In that moment, the clutter loosens. The invisible weight shifts. You begin to feel what life was meant to feel like. Lighter, calmer, more open. It is not that the world's problems disappear, but that your spirit is no longer buried beneath them. This is the promise of spiritual minimalism. The truth is, much of the hidden clutter we carry is chosen unconsciously. We accept roles we never asked for. We replay mistakes long after their lessons are learned. We hold on to grudges as if they were treasures, forgetting they burn holes in the hands that grip them. We plan for futures that may never arrive, and in doing so, we sacrifice the peace that is available right now. Imagine if you placed all these burdens on a scale. How heavy would they be? And imagine if, one by one, you chose to set them down. How different would your life feel? Cayce described the soul as a traveler who must pack for a long journey. To pack lightly is wisdom, he said, for the soul that insists on carrying everything from the past will never move far. What are you carrying that is slowing you down? Whose voices are filling your inner space, leaving no room for your own? The first step toward freedom is noticing that you are not the clutter. You are the traveler. You get to choose what comes with you and what stays behind. If you are listening now, let this audiobook be your invitation to begin. You don't need to solve everything today. You don't need to sweep your entire mind clean in a single effort. Instead, simply notice. Notice the hidden clutter. Notice how it feels when it presses against your chest, when it drains your energy before the day even begins. Awareness itself is the first act of decluttering. Once you see the boxes, you cannot unsee them. And once you acknowledge them, you can begin to move them one by one. Before we step further into this journey, take a moment to breathe. Notice where your body feels heavy, where your thoughts spiral. Ask yourself gently, if my mind were a room, what is piled in its corners? What is blocking the doorway? This simple act of seeing is enough for now, because recognition is the key to change, and clarity is the first light of freedom. The hidden clutter within is not your destiny. It is simply a room that has been neglected, waiting for your attention. And as we move forward, we will begin to open the boxes, name what they are, and learn how to release them. Because true peace does not come from adding more to your life, but from subtracting what does not belong. And so, we arrive at the next step. If there is clutter, what exactly fills that space? What are these unseen burdens that hold us back? It is time to begin naming the mental junk that weighs us down. Every journey toward clarity begins with naming what is hidden. Just as a doctor must first identify the illness before offering a cure, the mind must recognize the weight it carries before it can be released. When the clutter remains vague and undefined, it feels overwhelming, like a fog that never lifts. But when we begin to call it by its true names, the fog thins, and we see the outlines of what has been haunting us. These are the fragments of what we might call mental junk. Mental junk does not look the same for everyone, yet it often carries similar patterns. For some, it takes the shape of persistent fears: fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of being judged. These fears lurk in the corners of the mind, whispering limitations until they become invisible walls. For others, mental junk reveals itself as old biases, beliefs inherited from parents, communities, or cultures that no longer serve but continue to shape choices unconsciously. And for many, perhaps most, it is the weight of toxic expectations. The belief that we must constantly perform, achieve, and prove our worth to a world that rarely pauses to notice. Think for a moment about the language we use with ourselves. How often do you say, "I should be further ahead by now," or "I must not disappoint anyone"? These phrases are not neutral. They are clutter in disguise. Each should adds another box to the mental attic, and each must becomes a chain binding the heart. Soon the mind is not free to imagine, to rest, to dream. It is too busy obeying a set of invisible rules. Edgar Cayce once said that every thought leaves an impression on the soul, like footprints on wet sand. If those impressions are filled with anxiety, judgment, or self-condemnation, they shape the path ahead in ways we may not even realize. To recognize mental junk is to pause and examine those footprints, to ask, whose thoughts am I carrying? Are they mine, or do they belong to someone else's fears and demands? Consider the example of comparison. Perhaps you grew up in a family where success was measured by wealth, status, or recognition. Without noticing, you carried that yardstick into adulthood, comparing yourself relentlessly against others. Each comparison becomes a piece of clutter, small perhaps, but cumulative. Over time, the mind becomes a warehouse of comparisons, each one demanding that you measure up. And yet, no matter how much you achieve, there will always be another box arriving at the door, another expectation to meet. Recognition of this cycle is the first step in breaking it. Mental junk can also hide in the form of unresolved emotions. Imagine guilt that lingers long after an apology, or shame that clings from childhood, or regrets that play like a broken record. These are like old newspapers stacked in a corner, outdated, useless, yet strangely difficult to throw away. They whisper, "Hold on to me just in case." But the case never comes, and the papers only yellow with age, taking up space that could be used for something life-giving. Cayce taught that every soul carries lessons across lifetimes, and sometimes the clutter we hold feels larger than one lifetime's worth. But he also emphasized that nothing is permanent except the soul itself. Mental junk is not eternal. It is chosen, consciously or unconsciously, and it can be unchosen. By naming it, by saying aloud, "This is guilt, this is fear, this is not who I am," we take the first act of spiritual minimalism, separation between self and clutter. It is important to understand that recognition does not mean condemnation. To see the junk does not require us to judge ourselves for having it. In fact, judgment only adds another layer to the pile. Instead, recognition is like turning on a light in a dark attic. You don't curse the dust. You simply notice it and begin to clean. This gentle awareness is crucial, for harshness cannot heal what is fragile. Let us take a practical exercise. Think of one recurring thought that troubles you most often. Perhaps it is, "I am not enough," or "I will never succeed." Now, instead of wrestling with it, simply name it. This is doubt. Do not argue with it. Do not feed it. Simply acknowledge its presence. Like labeling a box in storage, the act of naming creates distance. You are no longer inside the thought. You are observing it. This small act transforms clutter from something overwhelming into something manageable. Imagine how different life would feel if each piece of mental junk were labeled. Instead of drowning in vague unease, you would know, this is fear, this is expectation, this is regret. Each label is a reminder that these are not your identity. They are simply items cluttering the room of your mind. And anything that can be named can be set aside. Recognition also reveals patterns. You may notice that your mental junk gathers in certain themes: perfectionism, comparison, control, resentment. Seeing these patterns is like discovering that many of the boxes in your attic contain the same kind of object. Once you realize this, you no longer need to sort through each one. You can release them together, knowing they belong to the same category of unnecessary weight. Edgar Cayce often urged seekers to examine not only what they thought, but why they thought it. He believed that behind every recurring thought lay a deeper lesson the soul was trying to learn. So when you recognize your mental junk, ask, what lesson might be hidden here? Is this fear teaching me the value of trust? Is this resentment pointing toward forgiveness? Is this comparison reminding me of the need for self-acceptance? In this way, even clutter becomes a teacher, not an enemy. Recognition is not glamorous. It does not look like transformation on the outside, but inside, it is revolutionary. For to name the weight is to loosen its grip. To call fear by its name is to shrink it. To say, "This is not mine," is to return the burden to where it belongs. Recognition clears the first space in the room of the soul, enough to let in a single beam of light. And once the light enters, more follows. As you walk through your day, begin to notice what thoughts feel heavy. Pause and whisper their names, gently and without judgment. This is worry. This is guilt. This is comparison. You are not the clutter. You are the one who sees it, and the one who sees has the power to release. So we move forward. Having named the mental junk, we now ask, what happens when this clutter takes the form of comparisons and expectations, binding us to standards that are not our own? The next step in our journey will take us deeper into the weight of comparison and how to live free from it. Comparison has become such a normal rhythm of modern life that many no longer notice it. We wake up and check our phones, scrolling through images of people who seem happier, more successful, more beautiful. We compare our behind the scenes to their carefully polished highlights. And in that quiet act, the weight of comparison presses down. It tells us we are not enough, not yet, not ever. This is one of the heaviest forms of mental clutter, a constant measuring of ourselves against others. Think of comparison as carrying a set of invisible scales. Every time you meet someone, those scales appear, and without thinking, you begin to measure. Their job title against yours, their car against yours, their relationships, their home, even their joy, weighed against your own. The problem is not just that the scales are heavy, it is that they are broken. They never balance in your favor. No matter how much you achieve, the scales tilt toward insufficiency, whispering that you must do more, be more, prove more. Edgar Cayce often warned that the soul loses its path when it forgets its own uniqueness. He believed each person carried a specific purpose, a vibration unlike any other, and that to live by comparison was to drown out that unique song with noise that was never meant to be yours. When you measure your life by another's path, you not only clutter your mind, you betray the quiet truth of your own journey. But how does comparison take root so deeply? For many, it begins in childhood. A parent says, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" A teacher praises one student and forgets another. The message arrives early. Worth is measured by how you stack up against others. From there, the habit grows until adulthood, where the world itself reinforces it. Schools with grades, jobs with titles, platforms with followers. It is as if society has built an entire house of mirrors, and we walk inside believing the reflections are real. Yet comparison is not truth. It is an illusion. Consider this. If a rose tried to compare itself to a sunflower, it might despair over its height. If the sunflower compared itself to the rose, it might envy its fragrance. But the garden would be incomplete without both. In the same way, the soul's purpose cannot be weighed against another's, because each one is designed to bloom differently. The moment you stop comparing, you begin to see your own beauty clearly. There is another kind of comparison that hides itself more cleverly, the comparison to who you think you should be by now. Many carry timelines. By this age, I should have this career, this home, this family. And when life does not align with the timeline, self-condemnation fills the gap. But Cayce often reminded seekers that time itself is not the measure of the soul. Growth occurs in seasons, and each soul ripens in its own rhythm. Comparing your timeline to another's is like demanding a tree blossom in winter, unnatural and cruel. Comparison also fuels anxiety because it never ends. The moment you reach one milestone, someone else appears to have reached further. You get the job, but someone else earns more. You achieve health, but someone else seems fitter. You find love, but someone else's relationship looks more perfect. It is a treadmill that speeds up the more you run, and yet, you go nowhere. This is why comparison is not just clutter, but poison. It keeps you moving, yet never arriving. So how do we free ourselves from this weight? The first step is awareness, as always. Notice when the scales appear. Ask yourself, am I seeing this person, or am I measuring myself against them? When you recognize the act, pause. Remember that what you are seeing is not the full truth. Every person carries hidden struggles you cannot see. Their smile may hide loneliness. Their wealth may conceal emptiness. To compare is to judge half a picture as if it were the whole. The second step is gratitude. Comparison thrives on scarcity, the belief that there is not enough. Gratitude dissolves this illusion. Each time you catch yourself measuring, shift instead into thanks. I am grateful for the life I have. I am grateful for the breath in my lungs. I am grateful for the small joys that belong only to me. Gratitude turns the scales into wings, lifting you above the endless weighing. The third step is to remember your purpose. Cayce taught that every soul has a pattern, like a fingerprint of destiny. When you feel the urge to compare, remind yourself, I am not here to be them. I am here to be me. This simple affirmation is a thread that pulls you back to your unique path. No one else can live it. No one else can replace it. To abandon comparison is not to shrink your ambition, but to redirect it toward what was always yours to create. Let us return to the image of the cluttered room. In one corner, boxes of comparison are stacked high, each labeled with someone else's name. One box says friend, another says colleague, another says stranger on the internet. Each one holds a mirror showing you what you are not. But what if you picked up one box and set it outside, then another? Imagine the space that would open in the room of your mind. Imagine how much lighter you would feel without carrying mirrors that were never meant for you. The release of comparison is not a one-time act. It is a practice, a daily choice to return to your own garden and tend the soil there. Some days, the scales will appear again. Some days, the mirrors will tempt you. But each time you choose gratitude, awareness, and purpose, you clear another piece of clutter. Slowly, the room becomes livable again. Slowly, your soul remembers the sound of its own song. When you stop comparing, you begin to see that life is not a race, but a tapestry, each thread necessary for the whole. And your thread, with all its twists and colors, is not only enough, it is irreplaceable. So we arrive at the next weight to be lifted. If comparison is one burden, expectation is another. What happens when the voices of society and family set invisible rules for how we must live? The journey continues as we turn from comparison to the tyranny of expectations. Expectations can be subtle chains, so light we hardly notice them, yet strong enough to bind us for years. They are not always spoken aloud. Sometimes they are whispered through culture, implied through family tradition, or absorbed unconsciously by watching how others live. Over time, these expectations form an invisible script, telling us what kind of person we should be, how we should act, and what milestones we must reach to be considered enough. While comparison looks outward, expectation presses inward, a constant demand to meet standards that are not truly ours. Think of expectation as a mask. We put it on without realizing, and soon it feels like part of our face. One mask says, "Be the perfect child." Another says, "Be the tireless worker." Another whispers, "Be successful, or you are nothing." Some masks even conflict with each other, leaving us torn between roles we cannot fulfill. And yet, because these masks were given to us by people we love or respect, we wear them long after they fit. Edgar Cayce often reminded his seekers that the soul's first responsibility is to be true to itself. He taught that living by the expectations of others is like planting seeds in someone else's garden. No matter how much you water them, they will never grow into the fruits your soul came to bear. When we live only to satisfy external voices, we lose the song of our own spirit. The tragedy is not only that we feel exhausted, but that we begin to believe the exhaustion is normal. Consider the common expectation of productivity. From an early age, many are taught that worth equals output. The busier you are, the more valuable you must be. This belief seeps into adulthood, where rest feels like laziness and stillness feels like failure. People live their entire lives chasing this endless expectation, never realizing that no amount of productivity can fill the void created by neglecting the soul. This is clutter in one of its most destructive forms, the clutter of trying to earn value instead of living from it. Other expectations are inherited through relationships. Perhaps a parent dreamed of a certain career for their child, and the child, wanting approval, carries that burden into adulthood. Perhaps a culture insists that marriage and children must follow by a certain age, and anyone who chooses differently is considered incomplete. These expectations, though often born of love or tradition, become heavy when they replace the authentic desires of the soul. To live under them is to live someone else's life in your own body. And then, there are the expectations we place upon ourselves, forged from the outside, but polished within. We say, "I must never fail. I must always be strong. I must not disappoint anyone." Each "must" is a stone added to the backpack of the spirit. Eventually, the weight becomes unbearable, yet still we trudge forward, believing that this burden is simply what life demands. But life does not demand this. These expectations are not universal truths. They are agreements we accepted, consciously or unconsciously. And like any agreement, they can be questioned, renegotiated, even released. Cayce often spoke of choice as the essence of spiritual freedom. Even when circumstances seem fixed, the soul retains the freedom to choose how it responds. To release expectations, then, is not rebellion but remembrance. Remembrance of the freedom that was always yours. Imagine for a moment a bird in a cage. The bars are made not of iron, but of invisible rules. Be this, achieve that. Never disappoint. Always perform. The bird accepts the cage because it has never seen the sky. But the truth is, the cage door has been open all along. The bird's freedom lies not in breaking the bars, but in realizing it can fly. Expectations are like those bars, real in their influence, but illusory in their power. Once you recognize them, you see the door. Once you question them, you take flight. How then do we begin to release this tyranny of expectations? The first step is awareness. Notice when you act from obligation rather than authenticity. Ask yourself, if no one were watching, would I still choose this? This question shines light on whether a choice is yours or borrowed from another's script. The second step is compassion. It is tempting to resent those who placed expectations on us. Parents, teachers, partners, society itself. But resentment only adds another layer of clutter. Compassion allows us to see that most expectations are passed down unconsciously, repeated patterns from those before us. When we release blame, we release ourselves as well. The third step is courage. To let go of expectation often means disappointing someone. It might mean saying no to a path others imagined for you, or redefining success in a way that confuses those around you. But courage is the bridge between captivity and freedom. Without it, the soul remains trapped in a cage it could have left long ago. Consider the story of a young man who followed every expectation of his family. He studied the career they chose, married when they expected, worked tirelessly to provide the image of success. Yet each night, he felt hollow. One day, he asked himself the simple question, whose life am I living? That question opened the cage. He began to explore what truly mattered to him. And though it meant facing disappointment from others, he found, for the first time, the joy of walking a path that was his own. The release of expectations is not about rejecting responsibility. It is about aligning responsibility with authenticity. True responsibility arises when we act from the center of who we are, not from the noise of what others demand. When we strip away false expectations, what remains is a life that is lighter, freer, and more honest. And so, the room of the mind begins to clear. The boxes of comparison are set aside. The masks of expectation fall to the ground. Space opens, and in that space, we encounter something even more tangled. The knots of emotion that have long tied us down. To move forward, we must learn the art of untangling these emotional knots and releasing the burdens of guilt, shame, and regret. Emotions, when left untended, can weave themselves into knots so tight they shape the very fabric of our days. Unlike fleeting feelings that rise and fall like waves, these emotional knots stay, hardening into patterns. They begin as small threads, a word that stung, a failure that lingered, a memory that refused to fade. Over time, the threads tangle until they form a mass we carry silently, unseen by others but heavy upon the spirit. Imagine a rope twisted upon itself again and again. At first, the knot seems small, harmless. But as it tightens, it becomes nearly impossible to loosen. This is how guilt, shame, and regret work in the mind. Each time we replay a memory, each time we tell ourselves, I should have done better, or I am not worthy, we pull the knot tighter. The longer it remains, the harder it feels to untangle. And yet, the very act of living lightly depends on loosening these knots, for they are among the heaviest forms of mental clutter. Guilt whispers that we have wronged. It does not always matter whether the mistake was grave or trivial. Guilt treats them the same. It follows us like a shadow, reminding us of missteps long after their lessons were learned. For some, guilt becomes an identity. I am the one who failed. I am the one who hurt others. I am the one who cannot be forgiven. But Edgar Cayce spoke often of forgiveness, not only from God or others, but from the self. He taught that guilt untransformed becomes poison, but guilt forgiven becomes wisdom. The knot loosens when we see guilt not as a chain, but as a teacher that has already done its work. Shame cuts deeper still. Where guilt says, I did something wrong, shame whispers, I am wrong. It is not about actions, but about identity. Shame convinces us we are unworthy of love, success, or even peace. It silences the soul's song. And yet, like all clutter, shame is not truth. Cayce believed that every soul is a spark of the divine, inherently worthy. To untangle the knot of shame is to remember that truth, that no mistake, no history, no judgment can erase the essence of who you are. Shame cannot survive when light shines upon it, for light reveals it as a lie. Regret is another thread, often woven tightly with guilt and shame. It tells us, if only I had chosen differently, my life would be better now. Regret keeps us chained to moments that no longer exist, robbing us of the present. The irony is that regret cannot change the past, but it can steal the future. Cayce reminded his followers that the past is never wasted. Every choice carries lessons, and every lesson carries seeds of growth. To untangle regret is to harvest those seeds and release the rest. So how do we begin the slow work of untangling? The first step is gentleness. You cannot pull a knot apart by force. Tugging only makes it tighter. The same is true for emotions. The more we resist guilt, shame, or regret, the stronger they seem. But if we sit quietly with them, acknowledging their presence without fear, the threads begin to loosen. The second step is naming. Just as we labeled mental junk earlier, we must label these emotions clearly. This is guilt. This is shame. This is regret. By naming them, we stop drowning in their fog and see them for what they are. Not our identity, but experiences we carry. The knot loosens further when we refuse to fuse our sense of self with the emotion. The third step is release through forgiveness. This is not always immediate, nor is it always complete in one act. Forgiveness is a practice often repeated until the knot falls apart. Forgiveness means saying, I am more than this moment. I choose to learn and let go. Cayce emphasized prayer and meditation as tools for this release. Moments of turning inward, aligning with the divine, and allowing grace to soften the tangled rope of the heart. Imagine yourself holding a tangled cord in your hands. At first, the knots seem impossible, but as you work patiently, a small loop gives way. Then another. Slowly, the shape changes. What once seemed impossible now unravels in your gentle persistence. The same is true of your inner life. No matter how long guilt, shame, or regret have stayed, they can be untangled. And here lies the beauty. Once the knots loosen, energy returns. Where shame once drained the spirit, joy flows in. Where guilt once pressed heavy, peace settles. Where regret once chained the past, freedom opens the present. The lightness of being is not a fantasy. It is the natural state of a soul unbound. Cayce described the soul as a traveler carrying a bag. Some fill the bag with stones of guilt, shame, and regret, making each step a burden. But others, through recognition and release, empty the stones and fill the bag with wisdom instead. The journey becomes lighter, the steps freer. You too can make this exchange. And so, in our ongoing clearing of the inner room, we have set aside comparison, questioned expectation, and begun to untangle emotional knots. The space grows larger, the air clearer. Yet one more form of clutter persists, the constant chatter of the mind itself. Even when guilt is released and shame forgiven, the mind still races, filling the room with noise. To continue, we must learn to quiet the endless stream of thoughts and rediscover the silence that heals. The mind is a restless stream, flowing day and night, carrying with it thoughts that rise and fade like ripples. For some, the stream is calm, gentle, and soothing, but for many, it roars without pause, filling the inner world with noise so constant that silence becomes foreign. This is the clutter of ceaseless thinking, the mind's inability to rest, to stop rehearsing the past or predicting the future. And though unseen, it is one of the greatest thieves of peace. Imagine sitting in a quiet room, yet hearing a radio playing in the background, never turned off, switching channels at random. One moment it plays old regrets, another moment it broadcasts tomorrow's anxieties, and then it drifts into judgments about yourself and others. You try to concentrate, but the static never stops. That radio is the restless mind. Even when the body sits still, the noise continues. And so we are exhausted, not because of what we do, but because of what we cannot stop thinking. Edgar Cayce taught that thoughts are not idle things. They are forces, shaping both inner and outer realities. When the stream of thought rushes without direction, it floods the soul, leaving no room for stillness. This is why many find themselves drained even after a day of little activity. The mind has been sprinting marathons in silence, leaving the body weary. To declutter spiritually, we must first learn how to quiet this stream, not by damming it entirely, but by guiding its flow into gentler waters. The modern world magnifies the noise. Notifications, headlines, endless feeds, all feed the mind's appetite to think, analyze, compare, and judge. The mind becomes addicted to stimulation, and silence feels uncomfortable, even frightening. Many cannot sit alone without immediately reaching for distraction. Yet in this very discomfort lies the medicine. Silence is not emptiness, it is spaciousness. But to find it, one must face the noise and learn how to soften its volume. One way is through breath, simple but profound. Each breath is like a stone dropped into the rushing stream, creating ripples of calm. Try sitting quietly and noticing the inhale, then the exhale, without forcing either. The mind will wander, it always does. But each time you return to the breath, you are reminding the mind that it does not need to race endlessly. Over time, this practice clears space in the inner room, like opening a window to let fresh air in. Another way is through observation. Instead of wrestling with thoughts, imagine yourself sitting on the bank of the stream, watching them float by. A thought of worry drifts past. You notice it, but you do not climb into the water. A memory rises, you acknowledge it, but let it flow downstream. This simple act transforms thoughts from captors into passing travelers. You no longer drown in their current, you simply watch them move. Cayce encouraged meditation as a means of quieting the restless mind, describing it as a way to listen to the still, small voice within. This voice, gentle and steady, cannot be heard when the noise of thought is too loud. But when the mind softens, when the stream slows, this inner guidance rises. It is not dramatic, not shouted, but it carries a peace that no amount of restless thinking can imitate. Consider how much energy is lost in overthinking. A simple decision becomes a battlefield of what-ifs. A small mistake becomes a mountain of imagined consequences. The restless mind creates problems that never existed, then spends hours trying to solve them. To live lightly, we must step away from this cycle. We must remember that thoughts are not commands. They are suggestions, and we hold the power to choose which ones to keep. The noise of constant thinking often disguises itself as productivity. People say, "I'm just planning ahead," or "I'm analyzing my options." But there is a difference between intentional thought and compulsive thought. Intentional thought is a tool, sharp and clear. Compulsive thought is clutter, spinning without direction. The soul can feel the difference. One energizes, the other exhausts. Imagine again the room of the mind. In one corner are boxes of comparison, in another the masks of expectation, and in yet another the knots of emotion. But covering the entire floor are loose papers, endless notes, reminders, half-formed worries, scattered without order. You cannot take a step without tripping. This is the clutter of restless thinking. To clear the room, you do not need to read every paper. You simply gather them and release them, trusting that the few important ones will remain. This is the practice of quieting the mind, not erasing thought, but creating space around it. A spacious mind is not empty but alive, like a clear sky where clouds pass without obscuring the sun. When the noise fades, peace becomes visible, not because it was created, but because it was always there, hidden beneath the static. As you listen now, notice your own inner stream. What thoughts are rushing past? What noise is filling the room? Take one breath, then another. Allow yourself to step onto the riverbank and simply watch. The stream will not stop completely, nor does it need to. But slowly, steadily, it will quiet. And in that quiet, you will rediscover the calm you have been seeking all along. And so, having recognized the restless noise, we prepare for the next step, learning to use silence itself as a tool of healing. For silence is not absence, it is presence, and in its embrace, the soul finds release. Silence is often misunderstood. Many imagine it as a void, a hollow absence where nothing exists. But silence, when embraced, is not emptiness at all. It is fullness. It is the spaciousness where the soul can breathe, where thoughts lose their grip, and where the spirit remembers its original rhythm. In silence, clutter dissolves not by force, but by grace. It is a balm the restless mind rarely seeks, but desperately needs. Picture yourself walking into a quiet forest. The air is still, yet alive. You hear not noise, but subtle music, the whisper of leaves, the breath of wind, the soft hum of life unseen. This kind of silence is not barren. It vibrates with presence. In the same way, when you allow silence into your inner life, you discover that what seemed empty is in fact overflowing with peace, clarity, and guidance. Edgar Cayce often spoke of the still small voice, the whisper of divine guidance that can only be heard in silence. He taught that healing does not always arrive in words, but in quiet impressions, in feelings that rise gently when the mind grows still. For Cayce, silence was not avoidance, but communion. It was the doorway to alignment with the deeper self, and through that alignment, to God. The difficulty, of course, is that silence feels uncomfortable at first. When the external noise fades, the internal noise grows louder. Sit quietly for 5 minutes, and suddenly the mind races, unfinished tasks, old regrets, worries about tomorrow. This is why so many avoid silence. It confronts them with the clutter they have been hiding beneath activity. Yet this very confrontation is the gift. Silence is the mirror that shows what has been ignored, and in showing it, offers the chance to release it. Think of silence as a friend who holds space without judgment. It does not argue with your fears or fix your problems. It simply sits beside you, steady and kind, until your breath slows and your heart softens. In its presence, the knots of emotion loosen. The scales of comparison lose relevance. The masks of expectation fall away. What remains is simply you, not the roles, not the clutter, just the essence that has always been enough. Practical silence can take many forms. Some find it in meditation, sitting quietly with eyes closed, breathing until the mind softens. Others find it in prayer, where words dissolve into presence. Some find it in nature, walking slowly without distraction, letting the earth itself speak. And still others find it in simple moments, turning off the television, pausing before answering, savoring a meal without hurry. Each act of silence is a small clearing, a moment when the inner room grows brighter. But silence is not only for stillness. It can be lived in the midst of noise. Imagine being in a busy city, sounds of traffic and voices swirling, yet carrying within you a pocket of quiet. This inner silence is not about the absence of sound, but the presence of calm. It is the ability to walk through chaos without absorbing it, to remain centered while the world spins. Cayce described this as attunement, living aligned to a deeper rhythm than the surface noise of life. Silence also teaches us to listen, not just to others, but to ourselves. When you stop speaking, when you stop filling the air with answers, you begin to hear what has been longing to surface. The gentle desires, the quiet intuitions, the whispers of truth buried beneath distraction. Many discover that the soul has been speaking all along, but its voice was drowned out by the clutter of noise. There is a paradox here. Silence, though still, is active. It heals, restores, rebalances. Like water flowing over stones, it shapes us gently, smoothing rough edges without our effort. This is why so many who cultivate silence find themselves calmer, wiser, more patient. They are not empty. They are full of a peace that cannot be shaken by noise. Consider a candle burning in a dark room. If the room is filled with wind and noise, the flame flickers, struggling to remain steady. But in silence, the flame grows still, burning with clarity. Your soul is that flame. Silence is the protection that allows it to shine without distortion. In learning to declutter spiritually, silence is not optional. It is essential. It is the space where the work of release truly takes root. Without silence, the clutter returns quickly, filling the room once more. With silence, the clutter loses power, for silence reminds us that we are more than our thoughts, more than our fears, more than the noise of the world. So as we continue this journey, let us carry silence with us, not as emptiness, but as presence. For in silence we find the strength to reframe our understanding, to see simplicity not as weakness, but as the quiet core of true strength. And this, in turn, will teach us how to embrace simplicity as the most powerful path of all. Simplicity is often mistaken for weakness. In a world that praises complexity, ambition, and constant achievement, choosing the simple path can seem like surrender. But true simplicity is not the absence of depth. It is the presence of clarity. It is the art of removing what is unnecessary so that what is essential can shine. And when practiced within the spirit, simplicity reveals itself not as fragility, but as a profound form of strength. Think of a blade of grass bending in the wind. At first glance, it seems fragile, easily swayed. Yet in its very flexibility lies its resilience. When storms come, it bends and rises again, while the rigid tree may crack. This is the paradox of simplicity. What appears soft is often unbreakable. What appears small is often immense. The soul that has shed its clutter, that has chosen simplicity, carries a strength the world cannot measure. Edgar Cayce often spoke of aligning with natural law, of living in harmony with what is simple and true. He believed that complexity in thought and behavior often reflected disconnection from spirit. When people tangled themselves in overthinking, striving, or endless ambition, they drifted away from their essence. But when they simplified, their habits, their thoughts, their choices, they returned to balance. This balance, he taught, was strength. Strength of body, mind, and soul. Modern culture, however, teaches the opposite. From advertisements to social media, the message is constant. More is better. More possessions, more titles, more experiences, more recognition. The clutter multiplies, and with it, the illusion that complexity equals importance. But does it? Consider the most enduring truths in life. Love, peace, kindness, presence. These are not complex. They are simple, and yet they hold more power to transform a life than any pile of possessions or accolades. To reframe simplicity as strength is to change the lens through which we see the world. A simple life is not a life lacking ambition, but a life where ambition is directed toward what matters most. A simple mind is not an empty mind, but a clear one. A simple heart is not naive, but grounded in authenticity. Each layer of clutter stripped away reveals not weakness, but an unshakable foundation. Consider how complexity weakens. The person who tries to please everyone fractures themselves into pieces. The one who hoards possessions becomes a servant to their own things. The one who fills every hour with tasks loses the ability to rest. Complexity drains energy because it scatters focus. Simplicity, on the other hand, concentrates energy. It allows the soul to direct its strength like a river flowing with purpose rather than spilling into 1,000 shallow streams. There is also courage in simplicity. It takes courage to say no when the world demands yes. It takes courage to release what others prize, to live with less when society measures worth by accumulation. To simplify is to stand apart, to resist the current of constant striving. And this resistance is not weakness. It is a deep inner power that refuses to be dictated by noise. Imagine a room with only a chair, a window, and light streaming through. Some might call it empty. But sit in that chair, feel the sunlight, breathe the uncluttered air, and you will sense the abundance hidden within the simplicity. There is space to think, to feel, to be. In the same way, when we simplify our inner world, we create space for peace, joy, and wisdom to enter. And that space is strength, the kind of strength that sustains rather than exhausts. Cayce often emphasized that true power does not come from domination, but from alignment. The soul aligned with spirit does not need to prove, to shout, or to accumulate. Its strength is quiet but unmistakable, like gravity pulling all things toward it without effort. This is the strength of simplicity. It does not force, it attracts. It does not struggle, it flows. You may wonder, how can one begin to live this way in a world that thrives on complexity? The answer is not to abandon all responsibility, but to choose wisely. Ask yourself, does this task, this thought, this possession add to my life or scatter it? Does it align with my soul or distract me from it? Each time you choose clarity over clutter, you grow stronger. Each time you honor simplicity, you reclaim energy once lost to noise. Reframing simplicity as strength also shifts how we see others. A person who speaks little may hold more wisdom than one who speaks constantly. A life with fewer possessions may hold more joy than one overflowing with things. And a heart uncluttered by resentment may carry more power than one obsessed with control. Simplicity reveals strength not by appearance, but by essence. As you reflect now, ask yourself, where in my life have I mistaken clutter for power? Where have I mistaken complexity for success? And where could simplicity, in thought, in action, in heart, give me the strength I have been seeking all along? For when you choose simplicity, you are not choosing less. You are choosing more of what matters. And in that choice lies freedom. Freedom to love without distraction. Freedom to live without pretense. Freedom to be who you truly are. This reframing opens the door to yet another layer of decluttering, not only in our thoughts and emotions, but in our relationships. For just as possessions can clutter a home and thoughts can clutter the mind, unhealthy relationships can clutter the soul. To continue this journey, we must now turn to the realm of human connection and learn how to release what is toxic, so we may nurture what is life-giving. Relationships are the threads that weave through every part of our lives. They can warm us like a blanket on a cold night, or they can tangle us like a web that drains our strength. Just as physical clutter can overwhelm a room and mental clutter can fill the mind, toxic relationships can clutter the soul. These connections may not always look harmful on the surface, but over time, they steal energy, cloud clarity, and make it difficult to walk lightly on the path of life. Think for a moment of a garden. Some plants enrich the soil, share nutrients, and protect one another. Others, however, choke the roots around them, demanding more than they give. In the same way, some relationships nourish the soul, while others drain it. Learning to recognize the difference is essential to spiritual minimalism, for a cluttered heart cannot carry peace. Edgar Cayce often reminded seekers that relationships are mirrors. They reflect back aspects of ourselves, both light and shadow. When a connection becomes toxic, it is not always about the other person's flaws alone. Sometimes it is about what we allow, what we ignore, or what we cling to out of fear. Recognizing this mirror does not mean blaming ourselves, but it does mean acknowledging that freedom begins with choice. Toxic relationships take many forms. Some are marked by constant criticism, where every word feels like a stone thrown at your worth. Some are defined by manipulation, where affection is withheld unless you obey unspoken rules. Others are poisoned by envy, where success breeds resentment instead of celebration. And still others are tangled in dependency, where one person drains while the other carries endlessly until both are diminished. The clutter these relationships create is subtle but powerful. They fill the inner room with self-doubt, replayed arguments, and invisible chains of obligation. You may find yourself thinking of the toxic person long after they've left the room, their voice echoing in your mind like a ghost. This is how relationships clutter the spirit, not by physical presence, but by lingering energy that clings long after the interaction has ended. Releasing toxic relationships does not always mean walking away forever, though sometimes that is necessary. It can also mean setting boundaries, clear lines that protect your peace. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors. They allow love to enter, but keep harm outside. Cayce taught that love without wisdom becomes weakness, but love with wisdom becomes healing. Boundaries are that wisdom, the way we honor both ourselves and others by refusing to enable harm. There is fear in this process, of course. To release or reshape a toxic bond often means facing loneliness, disappointment, or the disapproval of others. Many stay in harmful relationships because they fear emptiness more than pain. But here lies the truth. Emptiness can be filled with light, while toxicity only multiplies darkness. Letting go opens space, and space is where healing enters. Think of carrying a heavy bag filled with stones. Each stone is a relationship that drains instead of uplifts. You clutch the bag because you fear setting it down. What if you need these stones? What if you cannot find anything else to carry? But the moment you release even one, your steps become lighter. And if you dare to set the entire bag down, you realize the freedom of walking unburdened. This is the freedom waiting beyond toxic ties. Cayce believed that souls often meet again and again across lifetimes, sometimes to heal, sometimes to learn, sometimes simply to reflect. A toxic relationship, then, is not meaningless. It may carry lessons about self-worth, courage, or compassion. But once the lesson is learned, clinging to the pain is no longer necessary. Just as you would not carry a burning coal in your hand after understanding its heat, you need not carry a harmful bond once its purpose has been fulfilled. Releasing toxicity also makes room for nurturing connections. When the soil of your heart is no longer choked by weeds, new friendships and loves can bloom. Ones that enrich, uplift, and reflect the light you are becoming. These connections do not drain. They inspire. They do not demand masks. They welcome authenticity. They are not perfect, but they are life-giving. And in their presence, the soul finds rest. As you reflect, ask yourself, who in my life brings clarity, and who brings confusion? Who leaves me lighter, and who leaves me heavier? Who celebrates my growth, and who fears it? These questions are not about judgment, but about discernment. To live simply is to live with discernment, to choose carefully what and who belongs in the sacred space of your soul. In decluttering relationships, you are not choosing solitude, but depth. You are not rejecting love, but refining it. And in this refinement, you discover that true connection is not about quantity, but quality. A few roots running deep, rather than many scattered on the surface. With relationships clarified, the heart grows lighter, the inner room more open. And in that openness arises a surprising truth. When we live with less, we often feel more. More joy, more freedom, more presence. The next step, then, is to embrace the paradox of living with less in order to feel more alive. There is a paradox at the heart of spiritual minimalism. When you live with less, you begin to feel more. At first, this seems impossible. The world tells us that joy comes from adding more possessions, more accomplishments, more experiences. But the soul whispers a different truth. Joy is not found in adding, but in subtracting. When the unnecessary fades away, what remains is not emptiness, but fullness, not lack, but abundance. Think of a room crowded with furniture. Every space is filled. Chairs pressed against tables, boxes stacked high, objects covering the floor. You enter the room and feel overwhelmed. There is no space to breathe, no place to move. Now imagine removing half of what is there, then half again. Slowly, the room begins to open. Light enters the windows. You can walk without stumbling. The room feels larger, brighter, freer, and you realize it was never the size of the room that was the problem. It was the clutter. Life works the same way. Edgar Cayce often said that the soul thrives on harmony, not accumulation. He believed that true abundance was not measured in how much one possesses, but in how deeply one experiences the present. When the clutter of more is removed, harmony appears naturally. A quiet meal becomes a feast. A simple walk becomes a sacred journey. A moment of rest becomes a deep renewal. Nothing has been added, yet everything feels richer. Living with less does not mean abandoning joy, but redefining it. The joy of simplicity is subtle but profound. It is the joy of noticing small details, the warmth of sunlight on your face, the laughter of a friend, the calm of a breath. When life is not crowded with noise, these small moments expand, filling the soul with richness that no possession could match. The clutter of more often numbs us. Surrounded by excess, we stop noticing. The more clothes we own, the less we appreciate each garment. The more food we consume, the less we savor each bite. The more noise we allow, the less we hear the quiet beauty beneath it. But when we reduce, when we live with less, our senses awaken again. We taste more, feel more, love more, not because life has given us more, but because we finally have space to experience it. Cayce taught that life is meant to be lived in rhythm with spirit. Spirit does not demand excess, it invites depth. Think of water. A shallow puddle may spread wide, but it dries quickly. A deep well, though narrow, holds water that sustains. In the same way, living with less may appear narrow from the outside, but inside it runs deep, sustaining joy and meaning long after the surface pleasures of excess have faded. Living with less also reveals what truly matters. When you remove what is unneeded, what remains shines brighter. Relationships become clearer. Purpose grows stronger. Peace deepens. It is as if stripping away the noise allows you to finally hear the music of your own soul. And that music, simple and unadorned, is the sweetest sound you will ever know. There is also freedom in less. Each possession demands care. Each obligation demands energy. Each distraction demands attention. The more you accumulate, the more you serve. But when you release what is unnecessary, you reclaim your energy, your time, your freedom. You discover that happiness was never in the having, but in the being, and that being requires space. Consider someone who has simplified their life. Their home may not be filled with endless things, but what remains has meaning. Their schedule may not overflow with commitments, but the few they keep are rich with purpose. Their heart may not chase endless desires, but it rests in contentment. To the world, they may look like they have less, but in truth, they have more of what truly matters: joy, peace, freedom. To live with less is not to shrink life, but to expand it. By removing what does not belong, you make space for what does. You discover that less clutter outside means more clarity inside. Less striving means more presence. Less fear means more love. And this more is not something you must chase. It is something that has been waiting for you all along. So the paradox becomes clear. Less is not emptiness, but abundance. Less is not loss, but gain. And when you embrace this truth, you begin to feel the deep joy of living lightly. With this realization, we take the next step on our journey. For if living with less brings joy, it also brings focus, a clarity that anchors us in the present moment. And it is in the present, not the past or future, that true peace is found. The present moment is often overlooked because it feels too ordinary. The mind prefers to dwell on what has already happened or what might happen next, endlessly replaying and rehearsing. Yet in doing so, it misses the only place life is truly lived: here, now. Spiritual minimalism teaches us that decluttering is not just about removing excess thoughts or toxic ties. It is also about returning again and again to the simplicity of the present. For when we focus on the now, the noise of the past and future fades, and clarity emerges. Imagine walking down a path with heavy bags in both hands. One bag is filled with the past, memories, regrets, old mistakes. The other is filled with the future, worries, fears, imagined outcomes. You struggle forward, weighed down, unable to enjoy the path beneath your feet. But if you set both bags down, even for a moment, your hands are free, your steps light. You notice the trees around you, the air on your skin, the sound of your own breath. That is the gift of presence. The freedom to experience life as it is, not as it was or might be. Edgar Cayce often spoke of the power of attunement, aligning the soul with the eternal present. He taught that the soul is not bound by time as the body is, and that peace comes when we live in rhythm with the eternal now. When we obsess over the past, we live in shadows. When we obsess over the future, we live in illusions. Only in the present do we live in truth. Yet many resist this simplicity. The mind insists, if I analyze the past enough, I can fix it. Or, if I worry about the future enough, I can control it. But neither is true. The past is unchangeable, except in the lessons we draw from it. The future is unknowable, except in the seeds we plant today. The present moment, though small, is powerful. It is the seedbed of every change, the only ground where healing and growth can take root. Consider how much mental clutter vanishes when we focus on now. Worry about tomorrow dissolves when you realize tomorrow does not yet exist. Regret about yesterday softens when you see that yesterday is already gone. The chatter of what if and if only fades, replaced by the simple awareness of this breath, this heartbeat, this step. The soul feels lighter because it is no longer pulled in two directions at once. Presence is not passive. It does not mean ignoring the past or refusing to plan for the future. It means engaging with each in its rightful place. You learn from the past without living there. You prepare for the future without losing today. Presence is balance, the quiet strength of standing fully where you are. Cayce suggested practices that draw us into the present. Prayer, when done with intention, is not a request for future outcomes, but a deepening of awareness in the moment. Meditation anchors the breath, bringing the mind back again and again to now. Acts of kindness, too, pull us into presence, because love is always immediate. It cannot be postponed or replayed. Each of these practices clears away clutter by rooting us in the only moment that is real. Think of presence as a clear pool of water. When the mind churns with past and future, the pool is stirred, muddy, unreadable. But when you settle into now, the water becomes still. In that stillness, you can see reflections clearly of yourself, of truth, of guidance. The clarity was always there. It was simply hidden by the turbulence of distraction. Living in the present also deepens joy. Small moments, often ignored, become treasures. A simple meal tastes richer when savored. A conversation carries more meaning when listened to fully. A walk becomes a meditation when experienced with awareness. The clutter of rushing past these moments is replaced by the fullness of actually living them. And in this fullness, life feels abundant, even when outwardly simple. The present is also where strength gathers. Worrying about the future scatters energy, and dwelling on the past drains it. But when you root yourself in now, your energy concentrates. Decisions become clearer. Actions become more effective. You act not from fear or regret, but from grounded presence. This is the quiet power of minimalism. To live uncluttered is to live focused, and to live focused is to live strong. As you reflect, ask yourself, how often am I here, truly here? How much of my energy is tied to yesterday or tomorrow? What would happen if, just for today, I chose to release both and stand fully in the now? The answer is not theoretical. It is felt in the body, in the breath, in the lightness of the heart, when it finally lets go of what it cannot control. And so the path clears further. Presence teaches us that lightness is not found in someday, but in this moment. When we choose now, we begin to experience the soul's natural state, freedom. This freedom is not a reward for perfection, but the result of releasing burdens. In the next step, we will discover what it means to feel that freedom fully, to live with the lightness of inner being, unchained from the weight that once defined us. There is a moment in the journey of decluttering when something shifts. The burdens that once seemed permanent begin to feel lighter, and a sense of inner spaciousness arises. It is as though you have been walking with stones in your pockets for so long that you forgot what it felt like to be free of them. And suddenly, one by one, they fall away. This is the lightness of inner being, the natural state of the soul when it is no longer weighed down by comparison, expectation, toxic ties, or restless noise. Imagine a bird that has been carrying weights tied to its wings. It still tries to fly, but each attempt is strained, every movement exhausting. Then someone gently cuts the strings. The bird lifts effortlessly, not because it became stronger, but because it was freed from what held it down. The same is true of us. The soul was always meant to rise. The weight was never natural. It was added. When we release it, lightness returns, not as something new, but as something remembered. Edgar Cayce described the soul as a spark of divine light, inherently free. He believed that heaviness in life often comes from forgetting this truth, from believing that we are bound by fear, regret, or the demands of others. But beneath all of that lies an essence that cannot be touched by clutter. The work of spiritual minimalism is not to create lightness, but to uncover it, to peel away what is false until only the free and radiant core remains. Lightness of being does not mean a life without responsibility or challenge. Storms will still come. Difficulties will still arise. But when the soul is uncluttered, these challenges are met differently. Instead of reacting with panic or heaviness, there is a calm strength, a sense that this too shall pass. Lightness gives perspective, a way of holding life's struggles without being crushed by them. Think of carrying a heavy backpack up a mountain. Every step feels like struggle, and the weight consumes your focus. Now imagine setting the backpack down. The mountain remains, the climb is still before you, but suddenly your steps are lighter, your eyes free to notice the view. This is the gift of lightness. It doesn't erase life's journey, but it transforms how you walk it. Another sign of inner lightness is joy. Not the fleeting joy of possessions or achievements, but the quiet joy that arises simply from being. You wake and feel grateful to breathe. You sit with a friend and feel fullness in the connection. You watch the sky and sense wonder without needing anything more. This joy is not earned, not achieved, but uncovered. It is the natural fragrance of a soul no longer buried beneath clutter. Cayce often spoke of joy as a measure of spiritual alignment. He did not mean a constant smile or forced positivity, but an undercurrent of peace that flows even beneath life's waves. This joy is what remains when the false burdens fall away. It is not loud, but steady. Not dramatic, but enduring. And it comes not from adding more to life, but from carrying less. Freedom is another fruit of inner lightness. When the soul is cluttered, choices feel restricted. Fear dictates what we do. Expectations trap us in roles, and relationships bind us in obligation. But when clutter dissolves, choices expand. You realize you can say no without guilt, yes without fear, and pause without shame. You feel less controlled by the outside world and more guided by your inner truth. This freedom is not rebellion, but alignment with who you truly are. There is also a physical echo of this transformation. Many notice that when the mind and heart grow lighter, the body feels lighter too. Shoulders relax, breathing deepens, energy returns. This is no coincidence. Cayce often emphasized the connection between mind and body, teaching that a heavy spirit weighs on the body, while a light spirit restores vitality. The soul's freedom ripples outward, healing not only the heart, but the vessel that carries it. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of inner lightness is how it radiates outward. Others begin to feel it in your presence. You may not say much, but your calm becomes contagious, your peace a silent offering. Just as clutter spreads anxiety, lightness spreads serenity. In this way, your personal journey becomes a gift to the world around you. Take a moment now to sense your own inner state. Beneath the thoughts, the worries, the roles, can you feel a lighter essence waiting? Can you imagine what it would be like to live with fewer burdens, fewer chains, fewer weights? That imagination is not fantasy. It is memory. The soul remembers what it is to be free. The journey of spiritual minimalism is simply the path back to that remembrance. And yet, there is one final step. For while lightness of being transforms the inner world, its true promise is found when it expands outward, shaping an entire life of freedom. The uncluttered soul is not just lighter, it is free, and freedom is the foundation of true happiness. Let us now turn to that final stage, where minimalism reveals itself as not just a practice, but a way of living in freedom itself.